Welcome everyone to another episode of my podcast, and I am delighted, as always. I start my podcast with delighted. I need to change that, but I am delighted to have Jim Bloomfield on today. And Jim is from Bloojam Consulting Limited, his own business. And his headline on LinkedIn, which I always start with, is developing strategic salespeople and business leaders because sales behavior, not sales process, drives revenue growth. An interesting concept, I believe. Can you have one without the other? We'll soon find out. And if you read his about section, he says, to quote Daniel Pink, "We're all in sales now, and yet how many people in client-facing roles imagine that selling would be critical to their success? Probably not many." Jim, interesting concepts there, interesting, quite punchy statement. So I'll stop talking, introduce yourself, who, what, why, when, where. And as my listeners know, we'll see where this takes us.
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks for having me on the series. So my background is leadership, assessment and development for a number of wide range of sort of corporate clients. And the focus when you look at leaders is very much on leadership and leadership behavior. We wanted to sort of explore that in a sales context with our clients. So we take that sort of insight and focus on behavior and look at what does good look like in sales, in particular B2B sales, where there's a complex sales process involved.
Perfect. And of course, when we talk about behavior, we're not, I just have the Life of Brian quote coming in when, he's been a very naughty boy. We're talking about, the right behaviors in terms of, what needs to be done when, during a sales process, dare I say. I have no idea why that popped into my head. It's been feels like a long week. It's only, what day are we? Wednesday today. So let's kind of build on that then. What do we actually mean by behavior? When I've been in the game for it's 20 years now, showing my age, but let's unpack that a little bit. What do we actually mean by behavior versus process? Because some people may see them as the same thing.
Yeah, and of course there's some links between the two, but the behavior is really about what the salesperson brings in terms of their own capability, personality, motivations to a sales role. And our view of that would be that you can have people that are very different in a sales role that are equally successful. And what we need to do is unpick and try and understand, well, what are the behaviors that are underlying perhaps some of the stuff that you see on the surface that might, on the face of it, look quite different if you compare salesperson A versus salesperson B.
So how do you go about doing that? And I reflect on my time, certainly at PwC, for example, and law firm BLP, when some of the high performing partners or even high performing salespeople back in my recruitment days, if I sort of think back that far, sometimes they couldn't really articulate why they were doing what they were doing. They was like, well, I just do it. So how do you your business start to unpick why people are exhibiting a certain behavior to achieve an outcome, even if they don't even know themselves or understand themselves why they're doing it?
Yeah, well, I suppose the sort of boring answer is, as a business psychology firm, then we employ some business psychology techniques to try and unpick some of that stuff. Yeah. I mean, anecdotally, when we've worked with clients, what we were noticing, but with salespeople working in very different industries, selling very different products and services, is actually when you talk to them and ask them what they do, how they do it, and crucially, why they do things in that way. Actually, there's lots of similarity in terms of some of the responses that you were getting when you analyze those behaviors. So, why do people operate in a sales role? What do they enjoy doing? A lot of the answers at a very high level are about helping the client, providing great quality service, and so some of those things that you might expect a salesperson to say, which is, I do it because I want to make money. Of course, that is a motivation, but it's not necessarily the first motivation or the key motivator.
Yeah, and that's interesting in its own right, because if you if one looks at the narrative in sales, more in SaaS B2B, what I'm seeing, than necessarily, professional services sales, although we don't sell in professional services because it's a dirty word, although that is that is now changing. But if I look in the narrative I'm seeing in B2B SaaS tech over the last 12 to 18 months is that we don't want to talk to salespeople, SDRs, AEs. They don't add value. They're not helpful. People kind of admit they fall into sales. It's not necessarily, hey, I want to get into sales. I myself kind of fell into sales purely because my late father was a software salesperson, and I thought, well, he's pretty good at what he does. It affords a comfortable lifestyle for us, so why not give it a go? And here I am, how many years later? So, in terms of why do we think that is? In terms of this, there still seems to be this disconnect between the buyer and the seller. Yet, if you're the high level research you see or responses, I want to help people. Why is that then not necessarily translating in terms of what the perception is, or have we just got into this self-fulfilling prophecy that all the research papers out there are just kind of bashing salespeople because it's the right thing to say, because they sell more stuff when they're talking about kind of bad news, and then we sell more training off the bat rather than actually what is happening on the ground?
Yeah, well, I think that's a massive question. I think there's tons of stuff going on there. I think, in the UK, we don't sort of value sales as a traditional kind of route for a professional. It's kind of looked down on. So, that you've sort of got that going on. I think at an organizational level, there's all the sort of reward and remuneration schemes which sort of drive certain behaviors, which may or may not be helpful. And then at an individual level, as you said, in certain sectors, the word sales isn't even used, even though actually what you're asking people to do is go out, promote their business, promote their service line, promote their solution, and to originate business. But effectively, those people are selling their technical skills. They just don't call it that, do they?
Yeah.
So, I think there's lots going on there.
So if, just sales directors, marketing directors, salespeople listening to this podcast, based on your years of extensive of research up until, I guess, 12 to 15 months ago when we were in the normal world, what are the key themes that you see? And I appreciate that, at a more granular level, this is going to be slightly different, for the types of roles, seniority, and so on. But just to give our listeners something they can go on, what are the key themes that you see that are, for those that are listening, I'm doing inverted commas, good sales behaviors to achieve the assumed outcome, which is, closed won good business?
Yeah. Well, we break it down into three elements. So you have the sort of why, the what, and the how. The why is the most interesting in my view, because it's the stuff that is internal to the individual. So you're not going to necessarily see it if you're the sales manager or sales leader, unless you go looking for it. But that's about the individual's core motivations. So why they want to work in sales and what they derive from being a salesperson. Their sort of self-belief and resilience, which is about their ability then to bounce back from setbacks and to maintain a consistent level of performance. And also goal focus, which is about their ability to sort of plan forwards for what they're trying to achieve rather than be reactive and acting in the here and now. So that's the sort of why piece. The what then is about their ability to sort of understand the industry that their client operates in and the sort of wider themes within that industry, as well as the client themselves, to use that information to drive insights that they can take to the client or the customer. So to be able to show that they are, individuals sort of worth talking to and engaging with, and then using that insight and information to then educate the customer and to either present problems in a new light, or to demonstrate that they have an answer to a problem that the client hasn't even perhaps considered yet, and then to use all of that to drive the sale. So to make them to position themselves in the center of the sale and to be that sort of trusted advisor, to use a common term. So that's the what piece, and then the how is then really about the interpersonal stuff. So when you are face to face with the individual, whether that's remotely or directly, your ability to read that person accurately and to adapt and flex your own behavior to build the strongest possible relationship. And the other element to the how then is about ability to make connections, both internally within your own organization to join up that organization and to increase the value of the sale, but also then to connect within the market in which you're operating as well, so that you can generate new business. So that's a very brief run through of some of the sort of key behaviors that we would look for and that the research would say are kind of critical to good sales performance.
And it's interesting hearing you talk, because this just feels very much like not at the level of granularity that you go to, but again, back in my recruitment days when I was recruiting sales professionals into the IT and tech sector, some of those questions were kind of, I was asking the why, the how, and the what. And sometimes I came across people, it's like, do you actually really want to be in sales, full stop? Maybe this isn't for you. Maybe have a look at marketing, maybe have a look at, ops, something completely different. I mean, do you find that sometimes that, you have quite, I guess, in-depth conversation with salespeople, and you really kind of help them go, maybe this isn't for you, and that's not a bad thing. That's not going, you're a failure. Sales is bloody hard work, and to your point, resilience is, for me, one of the biggest things that you've got to be able to pick yourself up after, just a bad day, a bad week, a bad quarter, because it doesn't always go your way. And the one thing that I always, I learned very quickly is that when someone says no, when someone hangs up on you, when someone tells you to, bugger off, 99% of the time, it's not at you necessarily as an individual. It's the timing, it's the situation. They've had a bad day. So do you come across that where you actually go to people, you know what, this isn't for you, and maybe you should think about a different career path?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most common things that we see are technical experts who have been promoted to a point where they're now required to sell, and they have a sort of sales target or sales measure over their heads where they perhaps haven't previously. And we see that in all sorts of different industries, but broadly consulting is a classic example where you've got individuals who have come into that profession, whether it's IT consulting or professional services or legal sector, whatever that might be. They've gone through education, training in a very particular niche technical skill. They then are promoted through the organization because of those technical skills, to the point where, something like partner, for example, is within reach. And as soon as you become a partner, you're required to sell and develop your business and have a clear business case, etc. And all of a sudden, the technical skills don't really matter anymore, because you've got a team who are delivering on the technical side. Your job is to go out and be the face of that business and to sell that technical specialism, whatever it is. So if you look back at those individuals and their sort of career paths and what they came into the business, into the role to do, it wasn't to sell. So, at that point, they either adapt and thrive or not. And, part of that, I think, is the responsibility of the organization for putting them into something that they didn't actually sign up to do.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole podcast in its own right, just there, Jim. So I've got a lot of views on that, but let's park that for another time. Maybe a beer in the pub. I guess, but in terms of that, in all seriousness, I also have seen that translate into more traditional B2B, when you have very good salespeople then promoted into a management role.
Yeah, totally.
They're not even equipped or even should be in that management role. Then that can start to cause you massive problems, because you've got somebody who's very good at selling, maybe cannot articulate their behaviors and process in a way that lands to the people they're managing in terms of why they do certain things. And then you start to open up a whole can of worms there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see that as well. And we've had conversations with sales leaders who are looking for some support. And again, coming back to the sort of why, what, and how, on one level, it's quite simple. It's, well, you need to replicate these behaviors in your sales teams. But when you talk to people who are leaders about their motivations, actually, they don't want to lead other people in how to sell. They still want to be out in the market selling. And so what you're saying to them is, actually, we don't want you to do the thing that you enjoy and that you're really good at anymore. We want you to do this other thing, which is to manage a team. And suddenly they're much more internally facing. They're looking inwards, not outwards, and it doesn't drive them. So they either end up doing something that they really don't like doing, or they don't do it and they just carry on the sales side,
which then undermines the sales team if they're starting to step in on this on the meetings and claim credit for it and so on. Again, back in my recruitment days, this was some of the excuses I got as to why good salespeople were leaving their business, was primarily because of management. The way they were being managed. It's I mean, there is no simple answer in any of this, and I guess when we spoke, when we met a couple of weeks ago, I think what's been interesting for me is watching the last 12 months, the change that's had to happen for obvious reasons, and what that now is requiring in not only a behavior change, but skill set, but dare I say process, going back to your point around behaviors versus process. So in working with your client base and the research that you've seen over the last 12, 15 months in the global pandemic that we still find ourselves, I'm kind of still nuts that that's even been talked about in this podcast 12 months on from when it's pretty much 12 months on from when it started. What are you starting to see here in the market around all of that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think our view is maybe slightly different to yours, in that the behaviors are still the right behaviors. So you still need to be able to take insights, present them to your clients, and make yourself heard above the noise, I suppose.
Yeah.
The forum might be different, and people might need some training in how to do that using the social media that's available. But essentially, if you're not telling people something useful and telling them things that they don't already know, then that voice isn't going to be heard no matter how loud you shout. So it'd be interesting to hear your view on that, I think.
So I mean, for me, it's as much around the behavior change that is required to think, to Carol Dweck and growth set versus mindset, to think differently. Again, seeing this across all industries, both professional services and traditional B2B, especially and it is across all age groups. So the dare I say it, the older generation, boomer, gen, when I'm a Xennial generation, so the Gen X kind of age. So I'm 42.
Yeah.
It's around, if I go back to my Michael Page days way back when, the process still remains in the same. I need to start a conversation with somebody to be able to sell them something. How did I do it back then? That was cold calling. How did I go about finding those people? You go onto LinkedIn, you start to build connections. Fast forward to today, that outcome still remains the same of what is required that needs to happen to start a sales conversation with somebody to sell them something. But for me, what has changed is not only the process fundamentally in terms of to lead gen to get to that point, but some of the behavior shifts. And it's around, if I think about some examples, some large clients I've worked with in the last 12 months, it's, I'm connected to them, but I have them in my email Outlook, or I have them in my phone. I feel connected to them. I was able to go and meet them for a catch-up coffee or sit in the reception of, our big clients and spend all day there in the coffee shop and then just grab people as they came past. Now I can't do that. I'd never thought of social media, LinkedIn as the primary kind of place in terms of that type of connection, on why I should have connected behaviorally with these people 12, maybe 12 years ago, 12 months ago, 12 weeks ago, and what outcome that can then generate. You then layer on top of that the research that is out there, and this is McKinsey, this is Gartner, this is Forrester. So McKinsey research, end of 2020, December 2020, they surveyed 3,500 buyers of B2B products and services, and 15% of those respondents said they'd be happy to spend over $1 million on a product or service in a total virtual end-to-end virtual environment. So yes, happy to meet in this manner, but actually I don't need to meet people face to face anymore. I don't need people to get on airplanes. I don't need to pay for, that doesn't need to happen because this works. If you then take the next step on that, again, what Forrester is saying is the 60% of buyers can now say that they can create a shortlist of potential vendors purely from digital content, which does play into your insight piece and having a voice and rising above the noise. Then you play back the Gartner research, which is saying 1 in 3 millennial buyers, and this is the interesting thing, is there's this change of buyer, the change of buyer profile, the behavior of how those buyers want to buy based on the environment they've grown up in. 1 in 3 millennial buyers are saying they don't actually want to talk to a salesperson at all in the sales process. Now, I read that as, unless I believe this is slightly nuanced in terms of they're happy to talk to a person as long as that person is not selling.
Yes.
And I see it now as your role in sales is to enable the purchase, provided you understand all the other kind of digital touch points that have happened before that conversation happens or while that conversation is happening, so that when you're talking to them, you need to understand they probably know more about what your product does than you do. Or how it's going to fit into what they want to do, because they've done the research, they'll have seen stuff online, they'll have been recommended to you. So it's taking them that final 30% of the sales journey, if you will. But if you, and I'm starting to see is if you get on your first kind of call and you spend 55 minutes telling them about your business, the background, the founders, this, that, and the demo, without asking any questions around, well, what do you want to get out of today? How much you know about us already? Where do you think we kind of fit? They're going to go, well, I kind of know all this. That's why I'm not talking to you. So for me, it comes back to the behavior of a good salesperson. I completely agree with you. Once that process, if you will, of selling something has begun, that is absolutely how, the why, the what.
Yeah.
But for me, it's around understanding the change in how people now buy, which I believe is now starting to challenge the traditional sales processes, spin, TAS, BANT, all the kind of acronyms out there, that they were designed for a world which we don't find ourselves in today. Yet a lot of salespeople have been taught behaviors, and I'm doing inverted commas, to almost fit that process. I'll pause there and let you unpack my soapbox diatribe monologue.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because a lot of what you've said, we quote in our own sort of research and commentary, in that, picking up on a few of those things, the idea that the buyer is 60% of the way through the purchase process before they even want to talk to anyone. That's absolutely true. They've done their research, they've looked online, they've shortlisted maybe a few providers, and then they get in touch to sort of fill out any of the blanks that they may still have remaining. I think at that point, what you see then is that's the opportunity for the salesperson to sort of push and probe and challenge. Have they actually diagnosed their needs correctly? Because often that might not be the case. There's a good coming back to Daniel Pink. There's a good passage in his book in which he uses an example of an organization who their client came to them and said, this is what we want, and they looked at the RFP and said, well, if that's what you want, we're not really in the best position to provide that. That's not really what we do, but we can help you write the RFP. They did that in conjunction with the client, and then said, well, actually, now if that's what the RFP looks like, then yes, we can help. And surprise, surprise, they won the business from that point. So I think there is still scope and space to challenge the client and what they're thinking is the problem, because often they might misdiagnose that issue or not sufficiently understand the product or the solution to be able to really be clear as to what it is that they want. So, I think they do still value that sort of challenge, but you're right. We don't need the whole piece up front about who we are and where we've come from and when we were founded and et cetera, because of course they can see all of that on your website or other sources online. So yeah, I think the conversation is much more direct and to the point, but there's still plenty of opportunity to challenge in there. And if I think about our own conversations, moving, talking to new prospects or potential clients, that the ability to do that online, virtually, face to face has been great. It's got us in front of people that perhaps would have been quite difficult to get in front of in a face to face real world environment.
Yeah.
And then of course people are time poor, etc. So they get to the point of as to what they're looking for, but equally they don't just want you to sort of sit there and be nodding and go, great, okay, fine, that's what you want. This is how much it'll cost if you buy it from us. Actually, what we're doing there is saying, well, this is what we've heard you tell us you want, but what we see elsewhere in the market is this. If it looked like this, would this, is that still something that you want to explore, or do you want to sort of start to talk about these other elements that we've introduced you to? And in that way, it comes back to that, what I was talking about earlier around, then you start to educate the customer and maybe shift some of the needs that they may have self-diagnosed. It's a bit like, I suppose, going online when you should go to the doctor. You can self-diagnose lots of problems, but you might not necessarily get it right.
If you go online to find your problems, you're basically dead.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. The more you search, the worse it gets. And, that is one of the issues that you come across is there's almost too much information out there as well. So actually one of the roles of the salesperson is to help the client understand what's pertinent and what's not to their problem, and to give some insight, not only into their own business, but perhaps also into their competitors.
Absolutely. And I think, the old bait and switch and the RFP is a classic in the certainly the professional services consulting world. But for me, it's around this whole kind of concept of personalization at scale. I'm thinking more kind of B2B SaaS, because again, going back to McKinsey, they had some research out, I think, where are we? So at the beginning of this year, where they analyzed 60,000 SaaS deals in the US market. And this is also the difference between the US market and I think the European, APAC markets, 60,000 SaaS deals. And I think 80% of them, the highest performing sales reps, so they all started with a cold call. And so then one would argue is that the person isn't necessarily 70% or 60% through the buying process. However, what I would agree with, they are probably aware of what's happening in their world and think in the next 12 to 18 months, we need to do something because I'm just seeing this conversation. And then it's around, as a seller, from a relevance perspective, because you can't personalize at scale unless you're an Apple or a Spotify or a Facebook, which don't have the data points in B2B. We might get there, at some point. But if you're selling to a CTO in, I don't know, FS, for example, you should, as a salesperson, and what your product or service does, you should know that these are typically the three main problems CTOs face at the moment in the current environment in your world. Therefore, if you can get that across in the next 30-second sales pitch in a meaningful way to pique their attention and go, yeah, you know what, I have been thinking about that. Let's then have a conversation. I still feel that still is relevant. That's still also relevant from, if you look at the narrative coming out in kind of cold email. And this is this whole point, actually, that I think the role of a salesperson in terms of behavior, the really, really good ones that I am seeing are as much salespeople, as much as marketeers, as much as content creators. And this is across all industries.
Yeah.
If I look at back in the day, if you said to me 20 years ago, you'd be creating content, you'd be, having to do stuff, and I'd gone, no, I'm a salesperson, marketing's for the coloring department, and don't go outside the lines. Now I'm as much focused on the content, such as this podcast, that I'm creating myself. If I look at the really good, let's take professional services. So the role of a partner is, to coin an old school phrase, rainmaker. But the ones that get it online, that have a personality, bring insight, start to create their own kind of buzz around it, will stand out above the noise, will be the ones that are visible, going, hey, I want to go and talk to partner XYZ because he or she is just creating really good content with some good narrative, which has helped me think differently. I now want to have a conversation. The same applies in B2B, SaaS sales. There are some, SDRs, AEs out there who have a number to hit, but their management are allowing them the freedom to go out there and create unique content, which, you know, probably 12 to 18 months ago, the brand police would have had a meltdown about, because some of it is slightly out there. But if it's done with good context and a way, and they can go, that's time spent doing that, whilst I'm not on the phone, whilst I'm not punching out emails, whilst I'm not having call time, is actually generating much more inbound sales opportunity for me then to convert into qualified pipeline. I think we are in an interesting space in this area. And I'm not saying that every salesperson should do this, because you do see some stuff out there which is, yeah, no, just, I know what you're trying to do, and bravo for trying, but stick to the day job. But I do feel we are in this, it's really, really interesting for me just watching what's happening online across the piece in all of this, and how, where this is all going to go from a behavior perspective. If you look at the TikTok generation, if you look at Gen Z, Gen Alpha, which is now coming, the next generation coming through, in terms of just how they, basically how they communicate with each other, is not in an environment that you and I and our listeners necessarily grew up in. So get your crystal ball out, Jim. Where, and again, based on obviously the research that you've got, where do you see the role of sales as a person? If we accept that we don't want to be sold to, we don't like salespeople just in the round, where do we fit in this?
That's a really interesting question, and one that I was going to frame to you, actually, around the role of,
you go first then.
Yeah, the role of social selling, you know, kind of in the future. I think, you know, it's interesting because I read the other day, and you probably know much more about this than I do, that LinkedIn is bringing that sort of video content, personal introduction to
the creator profile.
Yeah, which I sort of read, and it just filled me with horror, if I'm honest. But yeah, you're right. You can see why they're doing it, and it's to tap into all of those newer generations who are used to posting personal content online as a sort of habit, I suppose. Where do I see things going? I think the salesperson still remains front and center. They're still core to the sales process. I think the methods, the you know, some of the ways in which you get in front of your clients will be different. But I still can't see it. I still can't see a world where there isn't a conversation between the buyer and the seller at some point. You know, whether that's face to face or remotely. But I still think that kind of people by people philosophy is still key. You know, because, you know, you might be drawn towards a brand because they're the market leader, but if you have a poor experience, you're still, you know, you're gonna think twice about going back to that organization. You're gonna tell other people about your experience, etc. And those experiences are driven by people. So, you know, I do think that the salesperson is going to remain at the center for a long time. You might not speak to them until later down the sales process, but they will still have the biggest impact on your decision to buy.
Or not, as the case may be.
Yeah.
I think I would challenge that, because I think that it will be A, dictated by industry, but B, I think pick up on the experience is a really interesting one for me, because yes, there's the experience in terms of this experience, in terms of the human interaction, but it's also the digital experience. You think about, if you have a really poor touch point on a website, you can't find something, you can't find the information, it just pisses you off, right? It's like, well, I'm not going to, that's already impacting that kind of that early stage experience. On the flip side, when the human, the salesperson, AE, SDR, partner, whoever, comes into that process, in an ideal world, they should already understand what is the digital experience that person has gone through to that point, to inform them where the conversation needs to start.
Yeah,
I do believe that, I think the role of sales will, I've already got account executives, you know, BDRs, the name sales it may well change. And if you look at, and this could be maybe not, this could be in 10 years time I'm talking, but our risk tolerances as humans of buying things online without talking to somebody, just to challenge the people by people bit, is getting higher and higher and higher. And I can now buy a Volvo, car as a service. I could go to Volvo, get a Volvo for £1,000 a month, Volvo XC90, £1,000 a month, delivered to my door without talking to a human being. I don't need to talk to a human being. I've done all my research. I know and trust Volvo as a brand. That's the marketing piece. I could go to LinkedIn and buy £10,000 worth of Sales Navigator licenses on a credit card without talking to a salesperson at LinkedIn. You look at what's happening in professional services in terms of the high value work, which is now being automated, inverted commas, and how will that change in terms of, I just need asset management support. I don't need to talk to anybody. Fine. Yeah, it does what it does on the tin. Happy to sign off a check for $100,000 over a 12-month period because it does what it does, because the experience the whole way through that journey has been awesome. This for me is where I think it starts to get interesting with kind of what customer success is today. Past that purchase point, then when, if I think I had yesterday I signed up to SurveyMonkey 12 months ago, I completely forgot I'd signed up to it. They then auto invoiced, entirely my fault for not probably reading an email as a reminder of 384 quid. I was like, oh crap, I'm not going to use this anymore. So call up the bank. No, it's pending on a debit card. You can't change it. Took a bit of an effort to find the form to get in touch with someone. I thought, here we go. Within probably 5 minutes, person responded, not a problem at all, sir. Absolutely fine, refunded, done. So now I'm going to say to anybody, even though I cancelled SurveyMonkey, the experience post purchase was amazing, to the point I even tweeted SurveyMonkey with the name of the customer success person going, awesome service. That will stick with me probably forever in terms of the human experience I had with someone, even though I didn't talk to them. That's why I believe that we are now in an evolution of the entire role of sales. But to your point about in the UK about it being not a profession, the APS, I've seen the APS are now merged, I think, with the Institute of Sales Managers, the ISM. In terms of trying to professionalize it. Again, this can be a whole separate podcast, because then this also starts to challenge how sales, any industry, is rewarded. Because if you tell someone, if you do that, that then happens. If you don't do that, this then happens. And you've got a manager going, I need that to happen because I've got the people at the top telling me this has to happen in order for all of this to happen. That doesn't drive the overall buyer experience, irrespective of what you're trying to do. And we've all been it, month end, quarter end, give them a deal, cut the thing. That's why buyers wait until the end of the quarter, because they know they can probably get a good deal. But then what normally happens is once that check is signed, the experience is probably pretty crappy, because product team haven't been told what's been sold. Something's been overpromised for the salesperson to get the deal over the line, because they've got management down there thinking, I need to hit our numbers this month, otherwise we're screwed. Or Glengarry Glen Ross, third price is you're fired, second price is a safe Deck Knives, and first price is an Eldorado. So for me, and it's just, I think it's really exciting. I think it's really, really exciting. And what I do believe is we need to bring more of the gyms into the world to actually start looking at the psychology behind all of this and the behaviors, rather than, to your point, seeing salespeople just as cannon fodder and replaceable, and we can just churn and burn. And this sits with the board for me. This sits at board level. CEOs need to go and sit in the trenches with their sales teams on the sales floors, listen to sales calls and go, this is freaking hard. CFOs need to do the same, because I get really pissed off when I see people bashing cold callers, going, oh, I just received a really shitty call outreach. Okay, your sales team, I guarantee, are doing exactly the same thing to your customer base. So how dare you come out there and call out poor behavior or process when we all know the same thing's happening under their own roof?
And absolutely, and that's where you come back to the process. And I think if it's too fixed, if it's too defined, then it doesn't give salespeople the sort of autonomy and license to bring their own personality and behavior to play. And I suppose that's where I come back to that whole point around people by people. If you're selling in a way that isn't authentic to you,
Yeah.
other people can see it, they can smell it a mile off, it's obvious, you know, you're just sort of going through the motions or following the process. I think, you know, in reality, in future, particularly in sort of high value B2B sales, you need to give salespeople more flexibility and more autonomy to be themselves and to sell in the way that is authentic to them.
Yeah.
You know, and if that's, you know, even thinking about remote and social selling, that isn't saying, you know, you need to post, I don't know, 3 blogs a week on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Some people will do that because they've got lots to say and can present it in an interesting and informative way. Other people, going back to that point around the technical expert, actually, they might be better off focusing on getting across some sort of technical point to their technical buyers, and that might be a less frequent, you know, bigger piece of online content. But so again, I think it comes back to that need to let people be people in a sales environment.
I think that's awesome. Let people be people. I think that's actually, like, you should copyright that. Rather than people buy from people, let people be people. I think that's actually a really good way to describe where this is all going. Let people be people. If so, people listening to this, what would be your, you know, if they're thinking about their own, they're managing a sales team, they think, okay, what are some of the things they should think about doing kind of right now, or maybe changing sort of the questions they could ask of their sales team to start to tease some of this out? And then to follow that up, where can people find you to learn more about what you and Bloojam can do to support them on this journey?
Yeah, well, I suppose coming back to my LinkedIn header, it's all about the behavior rather than the process. And so you may have the most amazing sales process in the world, but if you don't have the right people on the bus in the first place, then it's not going to be executed well. So we need to get the right people in place for your particular organization, for your particular industry, and for how you sell. And that focuses on sales behavior. We need to assess that sales behavior. We need to tell people where they've got strengths. We need to tell people where they need to develop or improve. And then we need to give them support to do that. And you can find out much more about how we do that on our website, which is bloojam.co.uk. And I'm an infrequent blogger, I have to say, on LinkedIn. So once in a while, you'll find a blog from me.
Perfect. And I assume people listening to this, they can find you on LinkedIn, connect with you on there, or send a request through the website. I'll put all the links to that. And one final thing before I let you go, Jim, I'm convinced your lampshade behind your head is the same one we've got in our kitchen downstairs. I'll be looking at it going, I recognise that. I think it's possibly from Wayfair is where we got it. I could be wrong. I always go random at the end of these. Jim, it's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for your insights and knowledge on this. I really do appreciate it. Let people be people. That's what I will post about when this goes online. But Jim, thank you so much for today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Great to talk to you. Thanks, Alex.